to depend upon and to commit yourself to the object of your faith. And that God wants us to bring us into genuine experience with Him. And so Christianity is a genuine, subjective walk of faith with God, our personal experience that's built upon the objective evidence. And so our faith operates on a base of understanding, an understanding of objective reality. We have a true understanding about the way God really is, about the way He made the world, about the way He made us, about His purposes for us, and what He wants us to do in our lives. And so we walk on the basis of that understanding of His character and of His purposes and of His truth that He's revealed to us about reality. And so that understanding then builds our faith, and as our understanding grows, our confidence goes, because I says, man, I know this is true, and it'd be stupid not to be a Christian because Christianity is the truth, and Christianity brings to us a correct description of reality, and I know that's true. And so if I ever stop being a Christian, I'm going to stop living according to reality, and I'm going to be running into the walls of reality. And you can't run into the walls without it slapping you in the face, see? And so God is trying to build us on a foundation of truth and a foundation of understanding, so we know what is true. And so that we're not conformed to this world system, the world of deception, but we're transformed by the renewing of our minds, that we might prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. We've just established our relaxation or our confidence that His will is good and acceptable and perfect, because it's the expression of His intelligence, it's the expression of His love, and it is a direction that lines up with the way that He's created reality. And so we're living consistently with the way He designed us to live, and fulfilling the wonderful purpose that He created us for. See, so we walk then in faith, and it's faith in God. Now sometimes in Christianity it's got a focus point away from faith in God to a faith in faith. I remember when I was a teenager, just wanting so much not to have to wear glasses, and so I just wanted to pray and believe that God would heal my eyes. And if I just thought if I could just only believe strong enough, I wouldn't have to wear glasses. And I was looking to my faith to be a good enough faith that I would be healed. And without analyzing what was happening, I was putting faith in faith instead of faith in God, and somehow my faith would make it happen. And so people, when they want to try to make their faith make something happen, what they do is they try to just say, well, I won't even speak about what the symptoms are of if I'm sick or whatever. And they just are not willing to just even acknowledge reality. But that's not biblical faith. And then there's the idea of you can only make a positive confession, you can't make a negative confession or state something that... but you know what? Remember the account back in Daniel chapter 2 when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were in the Babylon, and the king of Babylon required that all of his subjects would bow down to a statue of him, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would not bow down. And so when everybody's bowing down, they're still standing up. And so when all the people around you are standing around are bowed down and you're standing up, everybody can see you, right? There's no place to hide. You're sticking out there like a sore thumb. And here they are standing up and not willing to bow down. And Nebuchadnezzar says, give you one more chance to bow down. And just notice what their response is over in Daniel chapter 2. I think we'll start in verse... Where do I want to start here? I've got the chapter wrong. Daniel chapter 1. No. Chapter 3. I'm doing terrible today, huh? Yes, chapter 3 will get us there. And he speaks to them about they need to bow down. And in chapter 3, verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to answer you regarding this matter. If it be so that you would throw us into if it be so, in other words, if you throw us into the fiery furnace, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning furnace, from the fire. And he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, you know what but if not is? That's a negative confession. They weren't trying to have a faith in faith that God was going to do that and make it happen, and they're going to get their faith strong enough so it couldn't possibly be any other way. They just said, it's up to God what he does. And I know our God has the capacity to be able to do it, but we're submitted to him. We know his character, and we trust him, and we're just committed to serve him because he deserves our life. And if he delivers us, fine. If he doesn't, that's fine. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, nor worship the golden image which you have set up. And the phrase, but if not, is a negative confession. And even though they make it a negative confession, God delivered them anyway, didn't he? So God wants us to walk in a relaxation with him in having faith in God. Back in 1980, as leading a school of evangelism, God spoke to our school to go to on outreach to Hong Kong in China. And as we went to Hong Kong, we just worked. I prayed with the youth, the YWAM ministry leaders here, and they really looked things through and believed it was the direction God wanted. As a school staff, we prayed it through, and everyone believed it was the direction God wanted. Came and presented to the students, and they prayed about it. They all believed it was the direction that God wanted. And then we contacted a particular travel agency, and God led us to a travel situation where we could fly from Los Angeles to Hong Kong round trip for $500.
Wow.
And that was just incredible. We couldn't believe it. But they said we would have to have the money in by the end of November, by Thanksgiving time. And or that we wouldn't be able to have our seats. So the money had to be paid by then. So end of November came, and we didn't have our money. 1 or 2 or maybe 3 people had their money. Everybody else didn't have their money. And then my faith goes into a nosedive. And for the next 2 weeks, I'm going around thinking, what is wrong? We've done everything we could possibly do to try to hear your voice and to walk in the direction that you've directed us in, and it's not working out. Why? If I can't know your will about this, how can I know if I ever know your will about anything? We've done everything I know to do in seeking counsel and in prayer and in just a unity. It was a unity. Everybody was in agreement on it. And now it's not working. And after 2 weeks, the thought just came to my mind, you know, if they have some seats available on that plane, they're going to take our money and let us fly. And so at that point, I went back to the school and said, we're going to go just as far as we're able to go. We know we're able to go as far as from Texas to Los Angeles. And so when we take a Christmas break and go home to be with our families at Christmas time, when we come back, instead of coming back to Texas, we'll just all gather together in Los Angeles at the home of one of the school staff. Their parents lived in California there, and so we gathered together at her home. And then during the last 2 days, the 3 days we were there in Los Angeles before January 4th came, the day we were to fly out, all of the money came in for everybody except one person. And we've heard in the past about how God has released finances for people at the airport, and so this girl didn't know about what God might release money for her at the airport. So when all of us went down the airplane to get on, she went there too, just to see God would have opportunity to provide for her if he wanted to. And if he didn't, we'd made provision for her to be able to work with the youth with the Mission Street Ministry in Hollywood, so we had an alternative to know what direction God would have. And so as we're there at the airport, all of us fly out, no money came for her, and she sat and waved goodbye and saw all of us leave. And but God had released for all of us to go. And then she was involved in the ministry there, ministering to the street people in Hollywood there. for 2 weeks, and then God provided for her, and she came over, and God had customized a field trip, a ministry time for her that was very special just for her, and then she came on over to Hong Kong and joined us. But you see, faith wasn't a special way of feeling. Faith was a recognition of God's character and say, we're going to pursue what we understand you want us to do on the basis of who we know you to be. See? And so it's not faith in faith, but it's faith in God, isn't it? And we need to just make that so clear, you know. And see, because when you get faith in God, you can start relaxing. God wants us to be happy, relaxed, and delivered. And we're just walking hand in hand with our Father, and we're believing that Psalms 37 verse 23 is true. It says that though you fall, though a righteous man fall, he will not be hurled headlong, for it is the Lord who holds his hand. And the best picture that I had heard is one time when DTS girl was talking about when she was about 4 or 5 years old. She would go skating with her father, and as she was in the skating rink with her father, he'd have her hand, and she's trying to learn how to skate, and the wheels go out from beneath her, and she's falling down. But every time she fell, she never fell and got hurt, because her father held her hand, and he just kept her so she didn't fall, see? And so she fell time after time after time, but she never fell on her head. She was never injured, because the Father held her hand, you see. And if our earthly father can do that for his little girl, doesn't our heavenly Father always do that for us? And he will hold her hand, see. And we walk with faith in God. And God brings, our walk of faith is according to truth. And what is truth? Truth is the description of reality, isn't it? So as we walk with God, he leads us in the path of truth, and we're living consistent with reality, and so we're experiencing freedom. And in John chapter 8 verse 32, Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." Let's draw a picture here of reality. And in reality, some people are experiencing freedom. What is the opposite of freedom? What's the opposite of bondage? All right, so let's put bondage over here. Opposite of freedom is bondage. All right. Now, what is the dividing line between freedom and bondage? All right, truth. And in truth is a description of reality. So let's ask this question, when are we in bondage in our lives? All right, when we're in sin, aren't we? And why are we in bondage when we are in sin?
Because we violate our conscience.
Well, okay, well, that's the consequence of it.
Because we don't live according to reality.
Yes, because we don't live according to reality. Don't see. And so God created us with a particular design, and he created us with a particular purpose, right? And so our freedom, let's define here freedom. Freedom is the opportunity and capacity to live according to your design and fulfill your God-given purpose. Okay. Now, let's see what happens if I'm not living according to my God-given design and fulfilling my my God-given purpose. If I'm living contrary to my created design. Let's say that I steal. Okay. As soon as I steal, I'll jump over here and grab Lisa's. Oh, got it that time. What happens then? As soon as I start stealing, what happens? Lisa enters into some bondage, doesn't she? Because now she has the bondage of not having the availability of her resources to serve God with, and the fear of the loss of resources, right? I, of course, enter into bondage too, because I'm going to have the bondage as a result of guilt in my own life, the bondage of conscience, and I have an inner bondage. And other bondages, I've suddenly lost the opportunity of relationship with Lisa, to live in a wholesome relationship as a brother and sister in Christ, and so I have a bondage of a loss of relationship, and that results in a loss of many things. And but then all of you enter into a bondage too, don't you? Because as soon as you know that stealing's gone on, you say, well, now I know I just can't leave something laying on my desk because somebody might come along and steal it. I'm going to have to lock it up. And now you have a bondage of having to lock up everything, don't you? So as soon as people begin to live contrary to their design and purpose, that results in bondage to everybody, doesn't it? So there is a line that defines what is consistent with the way we're created to live and the purpose we're created for, and a line where it's got to be. And if I tried to move the line over in this direction, what does that do? That starts bringing bondage into the whole society, doesn't it? Because now things are being permitted to occur which ought not be permitted, and so this permitting things that shouldn't be permitted is called license. So now we have license here. Now, and then of course we're inflicting bondage on one another and inflicting bondage on ourselves. Now what if we moved this line in the other direction over here? And say I pass a law in my nation that you are forbidden to worship the true and living God, or I pass a law and says you shall bow down to an image of Nebuchadnezzar. Now I've been created for the capacity and designed to worship the true and living God, and now there is an area of oppression, isn't there? And now there's bondage because the line's been moved in this way. And it's a removal of my opportunity to live according to my created design and God-given purpose. So if you move the line in either direction, the result is bondage, isn't it? But there is a precise way in which we are to live, and God knows what that is, and so God told us to live that way, and He told us that direction by giving us His commandments, didn't He? So God's commandments are the dividing line between freedom and bondage. God's commandments are the dividing line between freedom and bondage. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 24 says, the Lord commanded us to observe all these commandments and to fear the Lord our God for our good always and for our survival as it is this day. See, so when we come into Jesus, we come back into freedom again, because Jesus brings us out of a wrong way of living and brings us back to the way we're supposed to be living, doesn't He? And so in Galatians chapter 5, verse 1, Paul wrote to the Galatians, it was for freedom's sake that Christ set us free. He wants us to be in relationship with Him and to be obeying Him because He wants us to live in freedom. Okay. And But we have to be willing to live this way, and that's obedience. And so there are causes of bondage. One is sin, where we have a refusal to obey. Okay? And so Jesus says, if anyone hears these words of mine and walks in them, see, then he will be like a wise man who builds his house on the rock. But if we walk in sin, the result is bondage, because as soon as I disobey God and I start stealing, that results in bondage upon me, and everybody else is affected by my stealing, as far as those consequences ripple outward. If I murder, then you'd say, well, I better not go out and walk on the streets tonight after dark, because I'm afraid I'll get killed if I do that. And so you have the bondage of immobility, don't you? It restricts the movement that God desired that you would be able to have in liberty. And so sin brings bondage, doesn't it? It brings bondage in my life and bondage to a whole culture. The second thing that brings bondage is ignorance. Hosea chapter 4 verse 6 says the people perish for lack of knowledge. People perish for lack of knowledge. I heard one illustration here about a missionary who was working in a different nation, and someone had donated a car to him to use. But the car developed a problem that it wouldn't start. And so the only way he could get it started was by pushing it. And so he'd get some kids out there and they'd push it and get it started. And then whenever he's parked it, he always had to park it on a hill so he could start it coasting downhill to start it, you see. Or if he wasn't anywhere he could park on a hill and he had to go in somewhere, then he would leave it running all the time. And so he always developed very special ways to be able to use his car, even though he had no way or opportunity to get it fixed there. And then when it was time for him to leave, and another missionary came and took over his ministry that he was carrying on there, he was telling them about how to use his car and explaining about how he had parked on a hill, and if he couldn't do that, leave it running, and how he had been very ingenious in the ways that he had worked of ways of getting it started and taken care of and working around this problem. And then the other missionary came, opened up the hood and looked underneath the hood, and he happened to see the problem right off. It's just one wire that was off. He put the wire right on, and he went in and started it up, and it just started right up, no problem at all. And so this missionary had put up with a situation for 2 years and had been a bondage or a limitation to him in fulfilling his purpose and living according to his design and accomplishing his destiny for God, because he did not know how to solve a problem. And we have problems in our nation and the nations of the world because people do not understand what the principles of God are, and specifically how they're applied and worked out into the various structures and institutions. See, it's not enough to be called a Christian and to be in relationship with God and to go and get other people in relationship with God. To remove the bondage of the daily life, we also not only have to bring the message of forgiveness, but we have to bring a teaching of the principles of God and how they apply if we're going to see the removal of bondage. Okay? And this becomes a major problem. But God wants us to have freedom, and freedom is connected to understanding. And biblical faith, built on understanding, really results in freedom. And Jesus says, you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Now, when Jesus says he will set you free, how free does Jesus want you to be? Does he want you to be a little bit free? Or mostly free? Like there's one movie that I saw one time about called Princess Bride. And in this movie, Princess Bride, there's one man that it looks like he's totally dead. And they take him to somebody to try to help him. And the man looked at him and said, well, he's not all dead, he's just mostly dead. There's a lot of difference between being all dead and mostly dead. And all right, how much, there's a lot of difference between being all totally free and mostly free, isn't it? Or a little bit free. And when Jesus said you shall know the truth and the truth will set you free, does he saying, I want you to be free some, but in some areas I still want you always to be in bondage? How much liberty does he want you to have? Does he want you to have liberty from sin? Does he want you to have liberty from the effects of bondage economically that come from a violation of biblical principles, individually and nationally? How much liberty does God really want you to have? Does Jesus really concerned about whether you have bondage in some areas of your nation or not? When he said he wants you to be free, did he really mean it? Is it really possible? Does Jesus know what he's talking about? What are the limitations on the extent of freedom? Are there some areas where the Christianity is always going to leave you in bondage? Are you content to go and work and help people to get out of bondage in some areas, but you won't apply yourself to get the understanding you need to remove the problems, to extend the liberty out into every sphere of relationship? There's a relationship between freedom and understanding, and as we walk in the understanding of God, we enter into true freedom. Now, God doesn't want freedom just simply so we'd have freedom. God wants us to have freedom because freedom is the opportunity and capacity to fulfill our relationship, to live according to our God-given purpose and our created design. So freedom is for the beauty of relationship. See, freedom can be misused, liberty can be misused, but he gave me a hand too, right? Is your hand a blessing? Well, it ought to be a blessing, but a hand could be misused, couldn't it? My hand can go, yeah, I can use my hands to murder with, see? See, and that's a misuse of a design, right? And so our thought should never be, we better not give people liberty, because if they have liberty, they might misuse their liberty. Well, then we better chop off their hands, too. Right? Liberty can be misused the same as your hands can be misused. And so we're accountable not only to have liberty, but for the righteous use, the right use of liberty too. And freedom is for the beauty of relationship, but relationship requires love. Love requires wholesome restraint, and that means fulfilling necessary responsibilities. As soon as wholesome restraint goes out the window, then that permissiveness of allowing things that should not be allowed evaporates our freedom, and our freedom is gone. So God is working, and God is at work in history to bring forth liberty, because God works to maximize the opportunity for people to live according to their created design, fulfill their God-given purpose, and that is in the environment of liberty. And God is working to bring that forth in all of his purposes in history. And we'll pick up more on that as the year goes on. Okay, we want to talk about the evidences that God exists. We want to ask the question, is God there? Now, the Bible presents that we can understand God's existence through what has been made. Psalms 19 verse 1 says, the heavens are actively engaged in declaring the glory of God. And the Apostle Paul writes similarly in Romans 1, verse 19 through 22, he says, for that which is known about God is evident within us, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, eternal power, and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made. So we can understand aspects of God very simply. You could say, by the work we know the workman. If we look at a coffee cup that's been made, and as we examine that, there are certain characteristics to it, see, and it would tell you something about the people that produced it. If you look at a certain lady and she's wearing a dress, and one dress comes down this way, that side, and the other one's up here like this, and this side, and that doesn't tell you everything about her, but you can look at what she's done, and it does tell you something about her, see. And so, by the work we know the workman. And so when we look at the creation round about us, and we observe the characteristics of that creation, it tells us something about the qualities of a creator who would create something like that. And let's think of the testimonies of existence. First of all, you have the testimony that just that stuff exists, and everybody's confronted with the question of where did stuff come from. And people could say it was always, it doesn't exist. But you can't live that way. You can't live on the basis of saying that nothing exists. If I try to live as though this wall doesn't exist, for some reason the thing that doesn't exist gives me a problem when I try to walk into it, see. And I was talking with one girl one time, and she says, I don't know, how do I know that I'm really here, that our discussion's really going on? I said, well, you just stay here and keep on talking. I'm going to leave, and I'm going to walk into the building over there. And then I came back about 5 minutes later, and see, you can't function with the idea that you're not exist. See, we know our existence by our consciousness, and so it's just ridiculous to try to deny the existence that's here and the reality of that. Or you could say it was always there. Never was a time that it didn't exist. We can look at that as a possibility, and we'll come back and talk more about that later. Or we could say that it had a beginning, then talk about the nature of that beginning. You either have the idea that God created it, or else it's self-created. And by self-created, nobody can ever explain how it could be self-created, because at one instant there's absolutely nothing, nowhere for anything to be, and then just mysteriously, out of absolutely nothing, with nothing to make it, nothingness took nothing and made it into something, and then out of that substance, then the universe is formed. And it takes you have to do a totally no evidence for anything whatsoever. You just simply say, I'm going to choose to believe that there was absolutely nothing and nothing there to create it, and then somehow something came into existence. That's incredibly difficult. See, our modern world says, I can't believe that God created the universe, but yet they'll think that somehow there was absolutely nothing, and nothing took the nothing and made it into something. How do you explain that? And so the Bible says in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And so, we got this stuff round about us testifying there needs to be a stuff maker for there to be stuff. And then when you see the stuff, then it is put into a design. It's not just a big universal blob, but there's all kinds of aspects to the design. There is precision that's there. Think of the precision. As the planets travel in space round about us, they travel at a particular speed and a particular orbit, so that the accuracy is so precise that as they calculate where a planet will be 100 years from now, it will be at that precise location within 1 second of their calculations. And the reasons the calculations are a bit off is because as you get in the computers, you have these round-off errors, because after you carry out so many decimal places out, you just drop it off and round it off to the next place, and that makes a bit of difference. 1 second of difference in 100 years of calculation with these round-off errors. But there's precision, there's preciseness there that you can depend upon. There's the preciseness of an atomic clock that's been made that's tuned to a radioactive crystal. This radioactive crystal has a frequency of 9 billion oscillations per second. So you take this clock, and by tuning to this radioactive crystal, they divided each second into 9 billion parts. Now, 1/9 of a second is not very big. But this clock is so accurate that if you let this clock run for 20,000 years, it will only be off 1 second in the time that it tells you. Now that's incredible. Imagine what it would be like if I got in my car and drove my car for 20,000 years, and after I've gone for 20,000 years, I'm only 1 second late. See, I'd consider that pretty good, especially for me. Okay? All right. Preciseness there. Where can there be a radioactive crystal that has such an intense frequency and has such an absolute perfect constancy to that frequency? There is regularity, isn't there? You think of the constancy of the motion of the Earth as it spins on its axis, going so that if you were standing on the equator, you'd be moving about 1,000 miles an hour. And traveling at that speed, you make one complete rotation every 24 hours, every day, don't you? Now think for a minute, what if that rotation were, instead of going at 1,000 miles an hour, you were going at 100 miles an hour? Then, instead of your days being 24 hours long, your days would be 240 hours long. All right, so in a 240-hour day, you'd be toward the sun for such a long period of time, you'd get too hot, you'd burn up. And then at nighttime, you'd be away from the sun, you'd cool off too much, and you'd freeze to death. So you'd die twice every single day, see? And here is a regularity that is a constant, so it stays the same. It's not shaking all over as it speeds up and slows down. And it's in interrelationships are there. The relationships are right, it's consistent. We have the right rotation speed to maintain a temperature in the range so we're able to live. See, so the temperature variation is within limits of that matches our life. Now, a person says that if our life, if there was a particular environment that's there, then you have a life evolving that evolves within the context of that environment. See, but if that's the way it is, you have these unanswered questions as why did not a particular life form evolve on the moon consistent with its environment, and evolve on Mars consistent with that environment, and you go on, see? Because evolution should be going on everywhere just the same, bringing forth some forth of life form that's consistent with the environment. And I really believe the Bible's right when it presents it the other way around, that God had a purpose in mind when He created us, and then to set up an environment which is a home in which we can live, see? And He's got the same drive and the same desire that we have when we have our babies born. And so you think about when parents are going to have their baby, I think what it was like with our children, you know, and the room, got to paint the walls in the room, right? Got to get the dresser painted, and then got to put these little for our little girl, got to have these little decals, right? And then they got to have this pink border around the ceiling, and you know, this room's got to be just right. And why does it have to be just right? Well, this is the baby's room, see. And so you can imagine what God just says, this world has got to be just right because this is the room for my people. And, oh, got everything just right now. Okay, now let us make man in our image, because everything else is established there. And so the Garden of Eden was incredibly wonderful, wasn't it? And then when I had to leave the Garden of Eden, it wasn't quite as nice, but it was still awfully wonderful. And so there's a regularity, there's a relationship between the environment and our capacity, and then there's interrelationship, other aspects of interrelationship. Think about the plant life, which takes in carbon dioxide and gives off oxygen. Your animal life, which takes in the oxygen and gives off the carbon dioxide. So there is this interrelationship of the world functioning together. It becomes mutually supportive. You think of the incredible marvels of things like instincts. You got these fish, the salmon, for example, up in the Columbia River coming out of Washington, the state of Washington, going out into the Pacific Ocean. And these salmon swim down the river, go out into the Pacific Ocean, and they've been found out in the ocean as far as 1,000 miles out away from the shore. But they have a life cycle of 7 years. And so they've been spawned in some small pond up in the mountains of Washington or Idaho or Wyoming. And they swim all the way out to the Pacific, and when it's time for them to spawn and bring forth their young, they swim right back to the Columbia River, right back up the Columbia River to the Snake River, if that's where they've originated from, up to maybe the Salmon River then, and right on up to the beginning of the Salmon River, up in the top of the mountains there somewhere in Idaho. And they're driven to do this, and they've marked these, and they discover that they always go back to the very same pond where they came into life, and that's where they spawn the next generation. And so when a dam was built across the river, the fish would come to the bottom of the dam, and they're trying to, and they can't jump this huge dam, so they've had to put fish ladder down around where they have a little tiny stream that goes out around the dam with just little incremental steps all the way down around. That's the right height for the fish to be able to jump from one little step to the next, so they go all the way up out around that dam, because otherwise, because of their instinctive drive, they would die there at that dam, not able to go any further. These are incredible things, the mystery things of how do they know. They've taken these fish and put them in a fish tank on the back of a truck, a huge fish tank truck, and they've taken them out of the pond where they come back to, driven to another pond, and put them in that one. And what do the fish do? They swim out of that pond, swim back through the streams that they need to, and come back to the original pond where they were spawned. They have this precise direction and precise location and instinctive drive to do that. You've got the monarch butterfly, which flies all the way from Canada down to, well, there's two different locations where they go. So the ones that go to Mexico, they go from Canada all the way down to a 2 square mile area in Mexico, near a little bit northeast of Mazatlan. Is that, yeah, a little bit up to the northeast of Mazatlan in the state up there. And once they gather down here, there have been so many of them that it's been reported that the weight of the butterflies have broken off branches of the trees from the weight of all these butterflies, and it's just one solid sea of these, the color of these beautiful monarch butterflies. But a butterfly lays an egg, and the egg hatches into a larva, and a larva then spins a cocoon and goes into the cocoon, and you have metamorphosis, and about 2 weeks later out comes this beautiful butterfly. And then it's ready to make this trip from Canada to Mexico. And when it makes this trip, all the past generation are dead. They never met their parents. Their parents had laid an egg and died. There's no Army scouts to go with them. Nobody from the past generation. So here, how do they know they're supposed to make this trip? And how do they know where to go? And how is it without any of them ever gone there before or known that any other generation before them had gone before, they all end up in the same area and they all do the same thing? We are confronted with incredible mysteries in the world round about us. You think about the wonderful design of our body. You got the eye, which millions of parts functioning together to give us eyesight. It's a very delicate area, and so it's the most protected part of the whole body. And so it's therefore got this bone structure all the way around the eye. It's recessed back a little bit so that any massive blow would hit the bone structure, not on the eye. And you've got the eyebrows to defer perspiration that would run down, not quite as bad. And you've got your eyelashes that will screen out some dust particles. Your eyelids can blink 1/10 of a second, so that you've blinked and closed your eyes before you even knew that something was coming. You ever had a conscious realization of something coming at your eye? And then you have tears, and the tears do three independent functions. They kill bacteria that comes in. They wash out particles of dirt that can get in there. So they cleanse the eye, they sterilize the eye. Of course, then they lubricate the eye too, and that's a wonderful function. Now, if you didn't have tears in your eyes, every time you move your eye around this morning, it'd be squeaking, and it's going to be hard to keep track of the lecture because you'd be hearing your neighbor's eyes squeaking all the time. And then, of course, your tears also carry oxygen back to your optic nerves in the back. So here's a fluid doing 4 different functions at one time. Now that's really an engineering feat. It's difficult to get a fluid doing 4 independent functions all at the same time. That takes thought and intelligence to do things like that in the world of engineering. And somehow what men have to, with great difficulty, to work to do is when they try to design things, it's supposed to have happened in their eye by chance, without intelligence behind it. And because and the reason you've got to get this oxygen from the air back to your optic nerves is because you can't have blood flowing through your optic nerves, because blood has color to it, and these optic nerves, they need to stay transparent. If you had blood flowing through it, you'd be seeing everything through rose-colored glasses, wouldn't you? And so it's important. See, these tears, then, what you have is these semi-truckloads of semi-trucks hauling oxygen back to your optic nerves, driving back and forth across your eyeballs, see, as they transport this oxygen. So here's a fluid that cleanses and sterilizes and lubricates and transfers oxygen. And that is supposed to have happened by chance if we do not believe that the Creator God who designed it and brought it forth. Well, these are incredible mysteries and designs, aren't they? You've got your eye being protected as well by your pain mechanism, because your eye, an injury, is a special disaster to your eye, and so your pain sensitivity level is set very high, so that even if the wind blows too strongly against your eye, you want to close it, see, because you can't. The force of the molecules getting too hard against your eye, or dusty environment, it's difficult to keep your eyes open, or a smoky environment. And then if you're wearing hard contacts, then you really are sensitive, aren't you? Because your contact has already loaded up your sensitivity level almost to the maximum already, back when the days they used hard contacts. Now, but you think about your feet. Your feet have a very low pain sensitivity setting, so that you can, and it's like God knew that when Larry Allen walks to school, he's going to kick a can all the way to school, see? And you've got to be able to kick cans with your feet, and it can't be hurting you when you're kicking those cans. So your feet is something you walk on and pound your way to wherever you're going, and so it needs to be less sensitive to pain. Now, what if our body got mixed up and you ended up having the pain level sensitivity in your feet that you have in your eyes, and you have in your eyes that you have in your feet? All right, see, then every time you walked, it would hurt too much. Ow, 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 ow! You can't walk on your feet, and so you'd have to end up walking on your eyes and seeing with your feet, because Your pain wouldn't allow it any other way. Well, there's incredible designs and marvels to what we have in testifying round about us to the existence of a creator God who's created us in a wonderful way, and we'll look at that more in our next session. All right, we're talking about the existence of God and the evidences in creation that testify to his existence. And one testimony to his existence is the fact that stuff exists. And if you have stuff, you have to have an originator for this stuff. And the most reasonable answer that you could possibly have is in Genesis 1:1. It says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And then you think about the stuff, and you see that the stuff has design to it. And there's marvels all the way around in the plant world. There's this thing in the plants called chlorophyll that makes the leaves of the trees green. And there's something about this chlorophyll that is unexplainable. People can, in the laboratory, scientists can take the ingredients that are in chlorophyll, but they have never yet been able to produce or manufacture a synthetic chlorophyll. So the very life, the essence of life that's in a tree cannot be produced still in a laboratory. They've looked at it and tried and still have not built a chlorophyll. And this is the stuff that makes the leaves of the trees green and the grass green. One man I heard speak one time, he says, "When we cannot put the green into the grass, it's time to bow down and worship the one who does." See, because here's the mystery of the chlorophyll, something that we can't explain how it works and how it functions. Cannot manufacture it. We know what it does. You got all the marvels of the human body. You've got your muscles. You've got about 400 pairs of muscles in your body. The strong ones sit in your back. The little tiny quick ones that move your eyelid. What if your body got mixed up, or by chance you had your little tiny eyelid muscles to control your back and your big huge back muscles to control your eyelids? You'd be so heavy in front from those muscles you'd tip over, fall over frontwards all the time because you couldn't hold the weight. But things are put together right. You take the bone structure, to about 214 to 216 bones that are in our body, depending on our age. And here's bones in your legs, the large bones that are appropriate for handling weight, a little tiny hammer, anvil, and stirrup that are responsive to sound vibrations, to give us ability to hear. And everything designed and matching perfectly the function it needs to do. In the 1800s, there's one engineer who studied the structure of our bone and the type of molecular structure it is and the way it's formed. And as he studied it on the standpoint of engineering, they saw that it was made of the lightest material and structured, so it was the lightest weight possible to carry the strength that it had. In other words, it does the most with the lightest amount of weight. See, so the amount of stress that you put on your body when you're lifting a heavy load requires something to handle a lot of weight and stress. And there is no other substance and no other design that can do it as well as your bones do it, without making you a lot heavier, and then you'd be too heavy. And so here is a wonderful design in our bone structure, so that it's structured to be able to be light and yet still functional. And you see that incredible design, in birds' wings, whatever, too, don't you? And the bones in the birds, which makes them light and makes it easier for them to fly, of course. But all the way through, if we talk about the various designs in our body, it's wonderful. And then there is in the world another area. It's called the anthropic principle. And the anthropic principle talks about the relationships, and let me just read this through it here. The anthropic principle says that if elementary particles forces, in other words, in the forces of atoms that hold the nucleus together, if you those of you that have had chemistry will recall that an atom has a center part that's called the nucleus, and out around the nucleus is your electrons going together in particular orbits, form an electric field around the center part, which is called the nucleus. And inside the nucleus there's particles. Some particles are neutrons and other particles are protons that are combined together to form the nucleus of the atom. And these protons and neutrons are held together by nuclear forces. And these are particle forces. So if you think about these particle forces that are there in the center part holding the nucleus together, and the forces of the electromagnetic field which hold connects one atom to another atom to form a molecule, and then you think about the forces of gravity, the gravity that's on us to hold our feet to the ground, and so we have the function of gravity. If these forces, all three of these forces, were only a tiny bit stronger or weaker, either direction, then our physical life could not exist. And so Professor Robert Jastrow, who's a very highly respected astronomer, world-renowned astronomer, perhaps the most renowned astronomer of the 20th century, he says if the nuclear forces were just a tiny bit stronger, that would create enough pull of the hydrogen so that all the hydrogen in the universe would come together to form helium. Now hydrogen in the center part in its nucleus, in the center, there is only one neutron in there. And if you have two neutrons there, that changes your substance from a hydrogen to a helium atom. And if these forces, if the force of the nuclear of a neutron, if the neutron's force were a tiny bit greater, it would have enough force so that it would have brought together, combined all the neutrons in existence, and there would have been a minimum of two, and so everything would have been helium, and there would be no hydrogen. And if there is no hydrogen, there is none of the stuff that's essential to the producing of hydrocarbons, which results in organic life, which results in plant and animal life. And so if these forces were just a tiny bit greater, it would be impossible to have the life of plants and animals and of our bodies that we have now. And if they were just a tiny bit weaker, well, not only that too, but in your stars. If your stars didn't have any hydrogen, stars are predominantly hydrogen now, and then that hydrogen burns and combined with oxygen, which gives off the heat and light that we gave from the stars. And if it were a tiny bit stronger, such that with the formation of stars, it would have formed helium, then your stars would be giving off no light or heat, and that would just totally make the existence of the universe not possible. And if these forces were just a tiny bit weaker, then carbon could not exist. And carbon's the other thing that's essential toward organic life, isn't it? Combinations of carbon with hydrogen. So Jastrow says it just seems like the universe has just allowed a very little tiny window. See, of the whole range of possibilities that you have, there is just this one little tiny, tiny, tiny narrow band that has to be precisely right there, or else physical life is not possible. But if all the possibilities are there, it just so happens that we line up precisely in that tiny band with these nuclear forces not being too strong nor being too weak. And so Jastrow, who won't come right out and say even that there's a God who's created things and doesn't declare himself to be a Christian, he does say that according to the physicist and the astronomer, it appears that the universe was constructed within very narrow limits, or else very limits, very narrow limits, so that man could dwell in it. And without using the word God, he just goes into the passive voice and talks about it being constructed. And So he's acknowledging a marvel and a mystery about the very elemental structure of the whole universe, and the association of these elementary forces there together. Now you think about there's the distance of the Earth from the Sun. If you have the Earth here and the Sun over here, and the distance in between the Earth and the Sun being about 93 million miles, approximately, and a distance of 93 million miles from the Earth to the Sun. What if the Earth were just 1% closer to the Sun? If we were only 1% closer, it would be too hot, and we couldn't exist. If we were only 1% farther away, it would be too cold, and we couldn't exist. So a 1% change makes life impossible. Now, if you're designing something in any area of design, whether it's electrical design or mechanical design, in engineering, many things are commonly have a 10% toleration. You're designed within a 10% limit. If you pay a lot of money, you can get some very close engineering that will be with a 3% tolerance. But typically your components, like electrical component, that's maybe it's something called a resistor that says it has that has 100 ohms of resistance. Then it'll be marked a 10% tolerance. So it means that 100 ohm resistor might end up being 110 ohms, or it might be as low as 90 ohms, but it's within a 10% tolerance. And it's marked as a 10% tolerance. Or if you pay a lot more money, you can get something that has a 3% tolerance to it. And so things like computers are designed with ranges of tolerances like this, and these incredible marvels of the going on the computer. So you can have incredible things like computers functioning that are designed in a range of 10% tolerance. But if you look at the Earth around the Sun, you cannot even have a 1% tolerance and live. Now that is incredible accuracy. How did that come about by chance? And why is that so essential when the designs that people make typically are not that? That's not the typical design at all. You think about the relationship of oxygen and life, and you think about the atmosphere that we have round about us, and all the conditions are wrong for life to evolve on Earth. The atmosphere would have to allow complex organic materials to form, yet our atmosphere does the very opposite. When an animal dies, if it's not buried, it decomposes, and so you have oxygen combining with the organic material that's there, and it decays and goes off, most of it as a gas then, see? And of course that's what makes the odor when something is decaying, as this gas is released. And so the atmosphere reduces substances, or it oxidizes substances, not reduces, it oxidizes. You get iron laying out on the ground, and iron, the oxygen will combine with the iron, and that makes rust, doesn't it? So our atmosphere is designed for oxidation. But if you're going to have life come forth, you have to have oxygen being removed, not being added. So our atmosphere is structured to add oxygen to things, and that's called oxidation, not to remove oxygen, which would be called reduction. But for life to evolve, reduction has to happen. And so it's impossible for our life to come forth in the atmosphere as it is today. And it's impossible then for life to have evolved in the world under the conditions that things now are. And a brilliant biologist in Britain, Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe, I'm not sure I pronounced his name exactly right there, and Sir Fred Hoyle are two of Britain's most eminent scientists. Recently they startled the world, it's back about 1983, when they said their research showed that there must be a God. Wickramasinghe said that by 1983, geochemists and geologists admit that the Earth's atmosphere has never been right for life to evolve. And now to get around that, because you cannot evolve life in the present kind of atmosphere they have, some evolutionists now say that there must have been a primordial soup that had to come to the earth by a comet or a meteorite. And so we must have evolved somehow in a condition that was on a comet or a meteorite, and then once it was here, that life then spread, because it's impossible for that life to have begun in our environment. Okay? I think I'd rather believe in God than a primordial soup, right, frankly. Except for one problem. God tells me to love my brother. See? And you see, if you think about the God that's described in the Bible, if you get to know him, there'd be no reason in the whole world why anybody wouldn't want to love God. He's got the most lovable characteristics of anybody in all existence. But he says we need to love one another, and I don't want to love one another. I want to go my own way and do my own things. And so then in order to do that, I have to deny him. And then to deny him, even working to deny his very existence. So people, therefore, would rather believe in a primordial soup than to believe in God. Wickramasinghe says, even if primordial soup did exist, logically, life still would not come forth. He says it turns out that the improbabilities are really horrendous, horrific in extent. And those are his words. And he continues on, and I concluded, along with my colleague, that this could not have happened spontaneously on the earth. End of quote. Okay. We recognize in all of our existence that there is a cause. There's a cause behind everything that happens. Now, in my actions, you know, the cause for my actions of throwing a pen is because I had a reason of wanting to give an illustration, right? And so there's a reason behind it then, or cause, right? But when I threw that pen, nothing else caused me to do it. That was a self-caused action, see? My will is the ability to have self-caused action. But all actions are either self-caused or else caused by something else. And so my existence is not self-caused. I did not choose to exist, see? And you said, well, then why am I here? I didn't choose to be here. Well, nobody chose to be here, see? But I'm here because you go back, the immediate cause would be my parents gave birth to me, right? But then how did they get here? Well, their parents. And so you keep going back this chain of causes until you get back, ultimately the Bible says back to Adam and Eve. You get back to the first parents. Well, then what was the cause of their existence? And the next step is God caused their existence. And then you're back into a different category. And when you're into a different category of existence, then you can have, see, just as I have self-caused actions in a given sphere, you can have God be eternally existing and self-caused. People can say, well, if God exists, where did God come from? Well, if God, if this is the universe and over here is God, if it's a different category, it can have different characteristics. Is that right? A frog has some different characteristics from what I have, because a frog is a different category of life, isn't it? A frog's green and I'm not. See, a frog has 4 legs and I have 2. So if you're talking about a different category, you're talking about a different nature of existence, right? And so it's not a problem. If God's a different category, there's no reason that category cannot be eternally existent. But all the evidences of this category are evidences of there's a cause behind everything that happens, either a self-cause or otherwise, and there has to, and this stuff that we observe round about us is not eternal. Now, how do we know that this stuff couldn't be eternal? If we have in science, there's a second law of thermodynamics, Second law of thermodynamics and this law states that trying to think of just the best way to express it here. So I want to read to be exacting on it. That when you observe what goes on, that you, wherever you have order and arrangement, that order and arrangement, when it's left to itself, see, here's an order of arrangement of 3 pins with the tops all in the same direction, all lined up in a line. And if I remove the constraint of my hand and let them go to themselves, they move to a lower degree of order. They go to disorder, right? And so you have order going to disorder. And this is the result of the second law of thermodynamics. Now this is just as much a law as the law of gravity. No one doubts the existence and the operation of the law of gravity. No one has ever supposed that in the existence of the whole universe that the law of gravity didn't apply from the very beginning of the universe. Okay? And there is no more reason to suppose that this idea of things going from order to disorder was not just as much. We have all the uniform evidences of the second law of thermodynamics as we have of the law of gravity. And so the observations always going on when you do not have work going on where you use a force to put something into arrangement, those arrangements go to chaos when left to themselves. So things are moving toward randomness. And so in order to move things from randomness to order requires purpose and intelligence. It requires intelligence, thoughts, and the input of energy to bring that forth. And that requires that there would be a God in order to do that. And then you think about the testimony of beauty. What would the number of this be? This be number 4. Well, number 4 was the atmosphere. Number 4 was the atmosphere oxidizes instead of reduces. All right, and then the 5th one would be beauty exists. Beauty is something that confronts us roundabout. Who's ever looked at the rainbow and not considered the rainbow to be beautiful? Cloud formations, sunrises and sunsets, the flowers like the rose and daffodil and narcissuses, whatever they are, and little edelweiss flower that grows high on the top of the Swiss Alps as they grow there. And so you have the beauty of creation round about us. And there isn't any reason that random chance activity would produce anything other than just a universal blob of gray matter, see. But here you have this distinction, and for some reason there is a correspondence between what we see and our ability to appreciate, so it's such that we look at a tree and say, that's beautiful. Like this mimosa tree out here, I look at that thing all summer long with its blossoms on and say, that's beautiful. We have this commonness have a commonness of appreciation of colors, etc. Beauty exists, a testimony that there's an aesthetic being who has a desire for artistry. And I was driving here maybe a year ago to one day think about it as I was driving my car back over to the school here, and it was right in the evening sunset there. And I looking up the sunset, and it was so beautiful, and I got to thinking, why is it that every single day you can look at a sunset and it never gets boring or monotonous. Why is it that that sunset always stays fresh? And my thought was, it's simply because there's never two sunsets that are exactly the same. There's always that, you have a God of individuality, so you have this individuality going all the way through creation, don't you? You have identical twins, and even though they're called identical twins, the identical twins do not have the same fingerprints. One twin has her fingerprints, and the other twin has her fingerprints, and they're not the same. And someday I've got to check in to see if anybody knows why identical twins can be identical twins and yet have their own unique fingerprints. But this diversity, this individuality that runs through it. See, so you look at these sunsets, and they always remain fresh and interesting because you have the general nature of the sunset, but yet the infinite combinations that they're always different, and they captivate us with their uniqueness and their specialness there. So you got the testimony of beauty testifying to the existence of. See, beauty comes out of intelligence. We think of an artist, when an artist does a painting, that there's a lot of thought and consideration designed in how to bring it about with a particular aesthetic nature to it, see. And the testimony of beauty then to the existence of a beautiful God. And we'll pick up further on this next time. All right, we want to talk about the testimony of our personality, see. We have personality. Now, personality does not come out of impersonality. Personality does not come from impersonality. First off, there is no reason that it should. And then secondly, there is no process description to describe how it could. No process description to describe how it could happen. And there is no evidence that it did. And yet our personalities are something distinct from the sticks and the stones and the amoeba that swims in the substance that it's in. Now let's just give some illustrations to think about this. Suppose we imagine a universe that is not like the universe that exists. Let's just imagine there's a universe that's just nothing but a huge ocean. Nothing but water. And in this universe, you have fish that are swimming around here. Okay, so we got a fish. And I need to draw my fish a little bit bigger so I can illustrate it better. Let's catch another fish. And this fish has got gills, see? And it's absorbed, it's from its gills taking oxygen that's absorbed in the water there. And then let's imagine that over 1 billion years or 2 billion years, whatever amount of time, these fish are evolving until finally you evolve to the point where you've evolved fish that have lungs instead of gills. Now, if there is no atmosphere, only the water, in such an environment, is a fish with gills a higher form of life or a lower form of life than the fish with lungs? Well, the definition of a higher form of lower form of life that would be used from an evolutionary point of view would be your adaptation to your environment. Okay, and so a fish with lungs would be a lower form of life because it can't exist in a universe where there is no atmosphere. See, it would require a fish with gills, and so it would be dead then. It just simply couldn't exist. Now let's imagine another universe. Let's imagine a universe where there is all that exists is the impersonal. There is no personality. So all you have is the impersonal. And then you have an evolutionary process going on where you start out with the amoeba, and then you go to the turtle. I go to the fish, and we can have a brown fish, I guess. Then we got to go to the turtle, and turtles have got to be green. So we got the turtle. I get a head on him here somewhere. And then we go to a cow. Tail, head of the cow and horns. And then eventually you have people evolve. Orange people. But when you get to people, you now have a being that has something that is called these evidences of personality, this longing of personal relationship, a longing to relate to something beyond itself, beyond the realm of man, reaching out to have a higher relationship. And so that longing, that drive to relate out to something in a greater sense may be expressed through Hinduism with their idea that they're trying to come into the relationship of the essence of God, come into the God consciousness, or expressed Christianity expressing that we need to become into the relationship that our Creator God created us for, a relationship with Him, and enter into the friendship we're designed for. But this aspect of longing to have a relationship to something beyond mankind. But if there's only the impersonal that's been brought about by chance, there is nothing to relate to. And so, in such a universe, with the amoeba, which fits well into an impersonal universe and not needing to doesn't have the drive to relate to something beyond itself, or the person with the drive of personality trying to relate to the impersonal, trying to have a personal relationship with the impersonal, which one fits better into the environment? See, the amoeba is better adapted, isn't it? And so it's the higher form of life. We're the lower form of life. Here we are, misfits in an impersonal universe, if there is no God, and we go for a walk in the woods and say, "Oh God, where are you?" And we're crying out to God, and we're trying to pray and reaching out for a being when there is nothing there but the impersonal to relate to. And so when we go for a walk in the woods and you see the moss growing on the ground, don't step on the moss, because it fits very nicely into its world. Respect it. It's a higher form of life than you. And instead of stepping on the moss, just lay down and let the moss grow on you. Our personality is an incredible testimony that there has to be a personal God who's created us, see. Because you understand that the cause has to be greater. The designer is always greater than the design. And you do not have the lesser producing the greater. You always have the greater producing the lesser. Then let's think about people here for a minute. Let's think about distinctions between people and animals. One distinction would be the distinction is the area of freedom. This area of freedom, suppose there's a dog comes into the room, Fido, what you doing in it? Get out of this room, I kicked the dog, get out of here. And I chase Fido out of the room. And I never pet the dog, never speak kindly to him, always chase him out. Well, after a while, that dog forms an opinion about me, see. And we call this conditioning, don't we? We say the animal has been conditioned. And we understand, too, that people undergo conditioning, that we are conditioned to situations. We grow up with a lot of the same habits and whatever our parents had, or people that we grow up with, or with our culture, and we undergo conditioning. But the thing about conditioning, let's think about the life of Jesus. When Jesus was on earth, Jesus declared that we are to rise above our conditioning, that our conditioning is not causative upon us. And so Jesus said in Matthew 5, verse 44 and 45, he says, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor, but hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemy." And rise above the anticipation of the rest of the world who think it'd be totally natural to hate their enemy. And Jesus says, love your enemy. Now, why is it that we are to love our enemy? Well, we're to love our enemy because the basis of love is to relate to something according to the value of who they are. And our enemy is equally valuable to the rest of mankind, because they're created for the image of God for the purpose of relationship too. And so we have a commitment to see if we can't work and apply ourselves in such a way to be most effective in bringing forth the highest good in their life, or seeing them come to the highest good. And so we love them on the basis of the value of who they are, not on the basis of emotions. And we love our neighbor. Now, and Jesus did this. When he was reviled, he reviled not again. He was persecuted, but he didn't persecute. They put him on the cross, and they stoned him, and they put him to death, and he was mocked, and they pulled out his beard. When he was on his earthly ministry, they took him over to the cliff. They're going to throw him over the cliff, but then Luke 4, verse 18 says, "But walking through their midst, he went his way." And I think about that verse. Boy, when I get to heaven, one thing, if I remembered, I'm not going to remember when you get up there, because there's going to be more important things. But one of the things, if you know, like in sports, you have instant replays where you can see the play over again they show it again. And I'd like to ask for an instant replay of that time when Jesus was in his hometown of Nazareth, and they were ready to throw him over the cliff. And the Bible doesn't give us a detail there. It just simply says, "But walking through their midst, he went his way." And I just think, what happened? What happened? Did they suddenly freeze up? Try to get him, but they can't move, or did they just space out and they wake up a little bit? What are we here for? Oh yeah, we're going to throw Jesus over the cliff, weren't we? Where'd he go anyway? What happened? I'd like to see that on instant replay and say, could we just run the video of that? I'd like to just, that's incredible. Can you imagine these people are already around and got a hold of Jesus, and they take him out and they're already throwing him over the cliff, and all the Bible says, but walking through the midst, he went his way. And the dynamics of that situation. And Jesus endured such opposition by sinners against himself. And he loved. He rose above his conditioning. He rose above every declaration that said things should be different from that. And then he teaches us that we are to do the thing. Love our enemies. Rise above your conditioning. We're to decide how we are to live and find the secret of that victory through relationship, and a victory through relationship with the Holy Spirit. There's a man during World War II in Holland. His name was V. Palazzo. I may not be pronouncing the name exactly correctly. But V. Palazzo was protecting Jews from the Nazis. And one day the Nazis found Jews hidden in his home, and V. Palazzo was put into a concentration camp. And as he was there, his wife was sending food in every day for him in the concentration camp. And but he wasn't getting it. Instead, the commandant was taking it and eating it. one Christmas Eve, his wife sent in a very special Christmas dinner. And the commandant called V. Palazzo into his office and said, "See this lovely Christmas dinner? Your wife sent that in for you to eat, but I wanted you to be able to see it before I ate it." And V. Palazzo said, "Well, I'm sure you will enjoy it. My wife's a very good cook." And of course, the intent of the commandant was to anger V. Palazzo. It didn't work, and instead he became angered and just commanded for V. Palazzo to be taken back into the concentration camp. And when the war ended, V. Palazzo had survived the concentration camp. He'd gone back back in his hometown, started a small lumber business, and one evening he was walking around to lock up the gates of his business for that night. We saw a truck backed up to one of the piles of lumber. There were two men there loading lumber on the truck, and he prayed and asked God for direction about what to do. He believed he had some guidance from God, and he walked over and started helping them load the lumber onto the truck. And as they're loading the lumber in the truck, he asked them what they're going to use it for. And they told him, he said, "Well, this is a very low grade of lumber, not very well suited for what you want to do. Let's take this back off, put it on the pile, and back up to that pile over there. It's a much better grade of lumber, much better suited to what you want to do." And they said, "How come a thief like you knows so much about lumber?" "I'm not a thief." "What do you mean you're not a thief?" "Well, I own this lumber." But then he had opportunity to share with them about Jesus. And the result was, that night, those two men became Christians. And that story always, every time I think of that story, it poses a question in my mind: would I be willing to trade a truckload of lumber for two men's souls? How about you? Back in the Bible, there were some people that didn't pass that test. Remember the story where Jesus was ministering beyond the Sea of Galilee in the land of the Gadarenes there? And there were a man demon-possessed who had been kept in chains. Jesus delivered him, and the demons went into the pigs. The pigs went down into the sea, and they were drowned. Well, somebody owned those pigs, and I guess it was over in the land of the Gadarenes, so it probably wasn't Jews. But if it was Jews, what were they doing raising pigs anyway? But they lost their pigs. And that cost them. Jesus' miracle was costly to them, and they begged Jesus to leave their region. He was not able to do miracles there because of their unbelief. Now suppose you're a dairy farmer, and these big black and white dairy Holstein cows, these black and white cows, cost about $1,000, maybe $1,200 a piece. Let's just say they cost $1,200 a piece, and Jesus is walking down the road, and there's a demon-possessed man that comes onto the property there, and Jesus comes on, and he casts 10 demons out of this man. And these 10 demons go into 10 of your dairy cows, and these dairy cows go crazy. They run around in circles, bang their head on a tree, and die. And you have just lost $12,000. Now, when you realize you've lost your $12,000, what will your reaction be? What if your reaction is you come to Jesus and say, "Jesus, I am so thankful that you're here. It's been so wonderful. I've seen that man and my heart's been aching for him. And I didn't perceive, I should have perceived how to minister to him, and I didn't, but I'm so thankful that you're here today. And he's walked up and down that road every day, and I've just been longing for his deliverance. And you've met him today, and it's just so wonderful to see him free. And I just love you, Jesus." What do you suppose the reaction of Jesus would be? Do you suppose, you know what, God's a debtor to no man. He'd give us 100 cows if we could take care of that many. But you see, that day in the Bible, when the men lost their pigs, not only did they lose Jesus, but they lost their pigs too. But V. Palazzo was willing to trade a truckload of lumber for two men's souls. And then he and his wife went back to visit in the town where the concentration camp was. They inquired about the commandant and found out that he was living on the edge of town, barely able to stay alive. And he says to his wife, "I know how much he likes your cooking. Why don't we fix him a very special meal and take it over to him?" And the end result of the story is they led that commandant to the Lord, and he became a Christian. This is the area of freedom, the ability to rise above our conditioning and serve God, to have self-caused action. And we'll pick up here and go on more next time.